Hey, are you ready to turn your voice and your podcast into an authority engine and not just more content? Well, welcome to Influential Voices of Authority. This is the podcast for coaches, consultants, and experts who are ready to stop being the best kept secret in their niche and move into being that sought after go-to authority. I'm your host, Erik K. Johnson, podcast talent coach and media veteran. In every episode of Influential Voices of Authority, I sit down with industry leaders and visibility experts to uncover how they use their voice, their message, and their platform to build trust, grow their audience, and attract premium clients. If you're ready to turn your voice into your greatest asset, you're in the right place. Welcome to Influential Voices of Authority. You know, if you want to become the recognized authority in your space, if you want clients finding you before you ever pitch them, if you want them showing up to your sales calls and sales conversations pre-sold and ready to do business with you, if you want opportunities showing up in your inbox instead of you constantly chasing them down, then here's one thing you need to understand. Your authority is not measured by what you say about yourself. It's measured by what other people say about you when you're not in the room. I have landed so many clients just by being on other people's stages. I show up on their stage and they all say, when it comes to podcasting, Erik is the guy I recommend. And that's how when other people are talking about you and referring you, that's what makes it magic. I was in a room, I got invited to come speak to a mastermind. And in that mastermind, there were 6 people in the room. And I spoke to that room already having the authority bestowed upon me by the guest. So it's borrowed trust, or by the host, I mean. It's borrowed trust because they're inviting me into their room, 6 people in the room. And I closed a $20,000 client after getting on a call because they showed up to the call predisposed to doing business with me because of what she said about me. What that host said about me got me the job. And that's what your authority is measured. It's measured by what other people say about you when you're not in the room. Real authority is not self-proclaimed. Real authority is referral-based. You need to own it internally. You need to step into your authority and believe that you are the authority in your space. But just because you believe it doesn't make it so. You need to be seen on the right stages at the right time with the right message in order to be that authority in your niche. It's referral based. When other people put you on their stage in front of their audience, they're bestowing that trust upon you. That's borrowed trust. And that's when your authority becomes reputation based. It becomes relationship based. That's when somebody starts saying, man, I need to meet that person. So many people are talking about that person. I need to find them. That's when people start saying, you have to hear what they teach. If you're interested in podcasting, go seek out Erik. They start saying their way of thinking changed everything for me. That's when you know that you've become an authority. When people start saying those things about you, that's when you know you've started making the step and the leap into that authority you are meant to be. Because the moment people begin carrying your message for you, that's when your business changes. When they start becoming evangelical about what you do, that's when the magic starts to happen. You stop being the one constantly trying to prove yourself. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop trying to convince people to trust you because trust already arrives before you do. You've borrowed trust. When they hear you on your podcast and understand what you believe and how you operate and what your perspective is and what your opinion is, they already know they like you. And so when they show up to that sales call, whether it's a webinar or a one-on-one call with them, or you're doing a workshop, they show up predisposed to doing business with you because they've already been pre-sold. The trust arrives before you do. Because here's the truth. Most experts never reach that level because they spend all of their time trying to fit in. I don't want you to fit in. I want you to stand out. I don't want you to be the best in category. I want you to be a category of one. I don't want you to step up and repeat what everyone else says. I don't want you to fall in line. I don't want you to teach what everyone else teaches. I don't want you to sound like everyone else sounds. Be you. Because when you do all of those things and then you wonder why nobody remembers you, well, it's because you sound like everybody else. If Chat GPT can crank out your information faster than you can, why do I need to listen to you? If your perspective and your opinion is the same as everybody else, then why do I need you when I have everybody else? Or worse, if you don't share your opinion and your thought and your perspective and you're just teaching information, then you're dead in the water. Because no one talks about average. No one shares ordinary. No one refers forgettable. You know, Seth Godin in Purple Cow said, if you want to be remarkable, do something worth remarking about. You can't just be a different cow. You have to be a purple cow. People will talk about a purple cow. You're driving down the street, you see a herd of cow. Here in Nebraska, we drive through, you see cattle everywhere, right? We're a beef state. So you drive down the interstate and you see a herd of cattle, or the highway. More importantly, you're driving through the small towns of Nebraska, cattle ranchers everywhere. And you see the cattle. Nobody says, ooh, look at that cow. He's got bigger spots than the other cows. No, they're not talking about a different shade of gray. If there were a purple cow standing amongst them, they would talk about the purple cow. That's how you become remarkable. You do something worth remarking about. If you haven't read Purple Cow by Seth Godin, I highly recommend it, because people talk about different. People talk about the things that aren't like anything else. People remember what's remarkable. People share thoughts that challenge their thinking, right? If you have a different perspective or you're going against the norm, that's when people start to talk about you. If you and don't just be divergent from other thoughts just to spur controversy. You truly have to believe it. And you have to lean into it. If you want people talking about you, you have to give them something to talk about. A fresh perspective. Maybe it's a unique framework. Maybe it's a memorable message. Maybe it's a point of view. A point of view that just makes them stop and think, wow, you know what? I never thought of it like that before. If it's something different, they're going to talk about you. Because when you challenge the dominant narrative, when you bring a fresh angle to the conversation, when you package your wisdom in a way that people easily remember and repeat, that's when your ideas spread. That's when your reputation starts to grow. That's when your authority starts to compound. You know, I'm completely anti-commercials on your podcast. I don't think you should add commercials to your show. Every other guru is how to build your audience so you can monetize your podcast. Adding commercials, ads, sponsorships to your show, one of the worst ideas you could do. Unless you organically incorporate a sponsor into your show, just putting a 30-second ad read on there is horrible. People are fleeing traditional media to get away from ads and sponsors. Like you don't want to sit through a commercial break. Do you ever watch a YouTube video and go, yes, another car commercial before I can watch my video? No, you never do that. Why would you do that to your show? Why would you do that to your audience? Don't you respect them more than that? Right? So people already hate it. There's a ceiling on the amount of revenue you can generate from ads and sponsors. You need a really, really large audience in order to do it. And unless you're in one of the big three niches of health, wealth, and relationships, you're probably not going to get that huge audience. And it's a heck of a lot of work to go land sponsors, and then you got to do it all over again. But all the other gurus are going to tell you that. And that's something that I lean into. And also lean into being you and your authority. People want to know about you. I was listening to a presentation from Podfest the other day, and the expert, the guru, got on stage, and he was talking about how nobody cares about you. They don't care about you. They care about themselves. Give more content so they feel better about themselves. Help them succeed. Now, I'm all about helping them succeed, but I completely agree that they don't care about you. They come for your content. They stay for you. And if you're not sharing you on your show, you're not sharing you on your stage, you're not getting them to know, like, and trust you, they're not going to do business with you. You want to lean into that so your authority compounds. When you can get your ideas to spread, eventually the right people start introducing you into rooms and onto stages you've never could have entered alone. And when I say stages, I mean anywhere you're in front of an audience. Could be a podcast, could be a YouTube channel, Facebook Live, live stage, summit, wherever you're getting in front of an audience. And that's exactly why this conversation with Michael Roderick is so powerful, because Michael teaches how to become more referable, how to package your ideas, your message, and your expertise in a way that gets people talking about you long after the conversation ends. You see, Michael's had quite the journey. He is now currently the CEO of Small Pond Enterprises, and that company helps thoughtful givers become thought leaders by making their brands referable, making their messages memorable, and their ideas unforgettable. His unique methodology comes from his own experience of going from being a high school English teacher to a Broadway producer in under 2 years. And now he uses his Broadway informed branding techniques to help his clients find their IF. That's their innovative framework. And he helps create offers where those experts get paid for their brains, get paid for what you know. So enjoy my conversation with Michael Roderick. Michael, it is so great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Let's start with the big question, Michael. How do you elevate your status and your authority in your niche?
Mm, I would say I spend a lot of time challenging the dominant narrative. So whatever's out there, whatever's being said in sort of large markets, large ideas, I'm always thinking about what is the different angle? What is the different way to approach this? What are the things that I disagree with that pretty much almost everybody else is saying this is the truth and this is the best way?
Where do you usually voice that opinion?
Most of the time, it's via LinkedIn. And a lot of the time, it's in interviews like this and conversations like this, where somebody will bring up a sort of well-known concept or an idea, and I'll often sort of share my spin on it or my take on that idea.
Were you always playing devil's advocate growing up when you were a kid? Were you that guy? You're like, oh, here comes Michael again.
I think it was less of like a devil's advocate sort of adversary thing, and I think it was more of a like, wouldn't it be cool if thing. Like I was always the kid who would sort of look at something and say, oh well, like could we try it this way, or could we do it in a different, in a different way? And I think that's really at the heart of most of the way that my mind works. I see something and I say, I wonder if it changed, if we did it this way, if it could be different and it could be more fun.
When did you become aware of that um, interest, or that sort of trait within you growing up?
Yeah, I think it started way back. I very distinctly remember, and some of us, had this in our educational sort of world, where you would go around the classroom and you do the round robin reading, right? Where everybody would read a little tiny section. And I was the kid who, when you got to me, I was like acting everything out and turning it into a movie. And I think so much of that was sort of where this came from. This desire to make whatever came my way even more interesting. Like I remember being a kid and playing with action figures. And rather than just playing with the action figures, I would take cardboard boxes and build castles and like put them in castles and like have somebody like hanging down from the ceiling by like a string. And they're like, it's as if they're flying. So I think, yeah, I think that's where a lot of that started.
So how did that turn into you becoming a high school teacher?
So my mother was actually a kindergarten teacher, and I used to go and I used to help her all the time when I was younger. And I just like I loved that idea of being in front of a classroom, helping, and all throughout high school, there I was always kind of in these positions where there was some kind of teaching involved, whether it was like a group project where it was like, okay, let's teach the class or let's sort of show everybody something. And I'll actually never forget, there was one time in my senior year where I had already submitted to be a teacher. I was already like on my way, I was already accepted at Rhode Island College, which was the college I went to for undergrad for education. And I'll never forget, we had an exercise in my English class where they had us teach the class. That was the exercise. And I very distinctly remember finishing the lesson and getting off stage, so to speak, right? And my teacher at the time, Mr. Riley, just saying to me, "You got it, kid. You're really good at this."
Nice. So
Yeah.
then, tell me the story of how you go from high school teacher, high school English teacher, to Broadway producer in 2 years. How does that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, it's pretty wild, and there's lots of sort of different elements to that particular story. But I think what's probably the most interesting is that I was teaching high school, and at the same time I was also doing theater. So I was producing small shows and working on, smaller projects here in the city. And one of the
This
things that
this
I,
was
yeah,
in Manhattan.
yes, this was in
Wow.
Manhattan.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was producing these sort of smaller shows and these smaller projects. And I was working on a show, and I knew the person who like was running the theater space at one of the places in Midtown. And I was watching a panel of producers, and they had brought a panel of Broadway producers to come and speak. And I'm watching this panel and thinking, this is amazing. I want to be around these people. And all of a sudden, it finishes, and I'm wanting to, talk to some of the producers. And of course, the line is massive of all these people who want to talk to these producers. So now I'm standing in line, I'm kind of waiting. And my friend who ran the theater space, she leans in and she says to me, everybody's trying to meet these people, but they're all going to be at our Christmas party. And a couple weeks later, I get an invite to the Christmas party, and sure enough, it's a much, much smaller, crowd. And I see one of the Broadway producers that was on the panel, and I just go up to her and I talk to her about the fact that I love producing and I'm so interested. But here's the most fascinating thing: she asks me about what I do. And I say, well, I'm a high school English teacher, but I also do all this theater sort of production. And she's fascinated by the fact that I'm an English teacher. And she talks to me most of the time about being an English teacher. And all of a sudden, at the end of that conversation, she says, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" I'm like, "Well, I'm on the wait list for, X number of shows at this point, right?" And she says, "No, you're not. You're coming with me." And she invites me to a gathering of the Broadway League, which is basically a cocktail party of all of the producers on Broadway. So I go from not knowing any producers to basically being in a room full of them, very simply because I talked to this woman about teaching, and that was sort of the main idea.
I talk a lot about authority through placement, like borrowed authority. So borrowed influence, when you find somebody who has the attention of the audience that you want the attention of, you can leverage that relationship. And that's kind of what you did here. You
Yeah.
connected to your friend who invited you to the Christmas party, and you connect with this woman who invites you to this amazing event, and now all of a sudden you're meeting everybody, and you have borrowed influence because you knew the right people. Do you find
Yeah.
yourself in situations like that a lot where you're networking and connecting on a completely different level than shoving business cards in hands
Yeah.
of people?
Yeah. I mean, I think that sort of it ultimately comes down to this aspect of, will people talk about you and your ideas when you're not there? Because for years, I really did think, I was like, oh, I end up in all these rooms because I'm good at networking. I'm a relational guy. I have all these great conversations. But after a while, I was like, no, it's because I get people who say to me, you have to meet Michael. And it basically just like ended up being this case of, people kind of came to me more so than anything else. And the realization that I had was, oh, it's how I talk. It's the way that I package and position my ideas and my thoughts. Like, that's actually what's getting all of the traction. And that's what led into a big study for me on referability, and really thinking about what is it that we do that gets people to talk about us when we're not in the room in a good way.
Well, oftentimes it's not what you're saying, it's who you're being while you're saying it and how you're
Mm,
packaging it. So dive into that a little bit, the study that you did and kind of what
sure.
you found when it comes to people referring you, and what is that magic sauce?
Yeah. So the way that I like to think about this is, I think about it as an AIM, AIM. And there's basically three main principles when it comes to referability. And the first principle is accessibility. Basically, nobody wants to um, engage if they feel stupid, right? So if you have anything that feels too inside baseball for them or feels too complex, a lot of the time they feel like they don't understand it and they feel dumb, and then they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to share it, with anybody else. And usually they don't even want to engage, right? They're feeling out of place, basically. So your first hurdle is always, whatever you're creating, are you making sure that it's accessible? Are you making sure that people feel comfortable hearing it? They don't feel like they don't understand it. That's always the first hurdle that you have. The
Are you a
second,
proponent
yeah.
of making it that eighth grade level that we hear so often about, like, right at that third grade level or that eighth grade level so everybody can understand it? Or do
I
you
yeah.
tailor it through the room?
Yeah, I think about it more in the context of, rather than thinking about it as far as like, oh, eighth grade level or sixth grade level, or this particular level. I think about it more from the standpoint of, what is something that everybody understands, right? Like, what is
Okay.
something that most people are going to get and sort of, hear and say, oh yeah, I know what that's like, right? Because in essence, yeah,
Universally relatable.
exactly,
Yeah, okay, I
exactly.
got it.
Right. So you always kind of start, from that place. And then the I is for influence. And most of us think of influence from the standpoint of, I'm going to get you to do something. And that's what
Mhm.
influence is. But true influence is if you do something without me asking you to do it. And the only reason you're going to do that is if it makes you look good. So very, very often, what the mistake that we make is, we try to be like, look how cool I am, as opposed to saying, here is something that's going to make you look cool if you share it with other people. And I find that's really where a lot of things kind of fall apart. If you are trying to get something referred, if you're trying to get something talked about, it's got to be the kind of thing that somebody is able to say, if I share this with somebody else, it makes me look smart. It makes me look cool. It makes me look interesting.
And What's the M part of that whole thing?
Yes. And the M stands for memory. And it's very, very simple that if it doesn't matter how great the thing is that you have, if somebody can't remember it, they're not going to share it, right? It's just not going to happen. And the way that I like to think about this is if you want people to remember more, you need to think about less, which is language, emotion, simplicity, and structure. So language is a memory trigger. If I give you language for something, it basically carves a piece of mental real estate in your brain. And if I say the word muggle, for example, you instantly associate it with Harry Potter, right? And it's that kind of thing. When you have your own language for things, basically people instantly associate it with you. So it sticks in their memory, sort of stays in that area. On the
That's such a big
emotions, yeah.
piece of creating a personal brand for yourself is to have that insider language
Oh,
that
yeah.
your tribe uses. It's not too cool for the room. People can easily understand it, like you mentioned
Yep.
earlier. But once they understand it, it's automatically attributed to you.
Exactly. And they're using it and they're talking about it to other people, right?
Yeah.
And then there's emotion, which in essence solidifies memory. When we are in a state of emotional arousal, when we are feeling strong emotions, our brains become like a sponge and we will remember far more detail when we're in that state of emotional arousal. So if we are making sure that whatever it is we're sharing or talking about somehow taps into an emotion, then it's far more likely somebody is going to remember that idea and that concept, which is a core reason why storytelling ends up being so effective. Because when we tell a story, it basically triggers emotions in people and causes them to relive certain emotions in their own life, right? So if we go even back to earlier in the interview where I talked about that crowd and basically being stuck in line, there are a bunch of people who would hear that and remember a moment where they were also stuck in line hoping to talk to somebody, and they are going to feel that emotion in that moment, and that's actually going to trigger memories for them but also get them to remember that portion of the interview.
Yeah,
That's something that will happen.
we talk a lot about storytelling, and I think people confuse storytelling with anecdotes. And an
Yes.
anecdote just simply going through a series of events with no tension and no climax and no transformation in it that really makes it a story. People just tell a series of events and think they're storytelling, and what they're missing is stirring that emotion with that tension and that the climax of that story.
Exactly, and bringing all of that together, and that leads to simplicity, which is really, really important because our brains can only process a certain amount of information at one time. So if you think about it as you're carrying a batch of apples, right? If you're holding 3 apples, you're fine. If you're holding 15 apples, you're going to have a little bit of trouble, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time we have to think about, okay, what is the highest level of simplicity I can give to this idea so that somebody can remember it, right? And be able to actually transfer the information to somebody else, which leads to the very last part, which is structure, because we need order for our brains to process information. So if we give somebody a structure, if we say this comes first, this comes second, this comes third, then they are way more likely to be able to share it. So going back to the very beginning where we talked about AIM, accessibility, influence, and memory, now you think about AIM, but you know the order of those three things, and you know the logical order, And as a result, it's easier for you to share the concept. It's easier for you to sort of pass it on to somebody else, and likely significantly easier for you to remember it.
Well, if you go back and you look at the stories of the Bible or Aesop's fables or all of the ways that we learn, that's a perfect example of simplicity
Hmm.
and order and memorability of it all. It shows up in everyday life if you just
Hmm.
look for it. You'll see it. When
Yeah.
people are trying to implement this to leverage that authority and that influence and that attention, what sort of challenges do you see them running into?
Yeah. So I think what is probably one of the biggest challenges is that they have. I like to think about this. There's a metaphor that I use, I call the triple threat. And in the theater world, there's the idea that as a performer, if you're a triple threat, it means that you can do three things: you can act, you can sing, and you can dance. You can do all three if you're a triple threat, right? But what a lot of people don't know is that the order of those things is usually very important to the performer's success. So if you are a really great actor and you're a pretty good singer, and as a dancer you can move, then your order is actor, singer, dancer, which means you want to focus on the things that are going to show off your acting ability and the things that are going to show off your singing ability. And you're going to want to avoid the things that are going to be more complex or challenging when it comes to dance. Well, every single individual, it doesn't matter what industry you're in and it doesn't matter what work you do, you have a triple threat of your own, but it's a thinking talent. And the way that I like to think about this in terms of that order and those thinking talents are the scientist, the celebrity, and the magician. So if scientist is your top talent, that means that you are a highly analytical thinker. You're really good at the research. You're really good at breaking things down, understanding things in a hyper granular way. But you may actually struggle with a lot of the social relational stuff because you'd rather sort of spend most of your time in the lab, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you are the celebrity, if that's your top talent, then you're far more relational driven. You love doing the presentational side of things. You're very performative in lots of ways, but the science actually might bog you down. You might not really like or enjoy a lot of the research, and your thinking may not follow that same sort of path. And then if magician is your top talent, you are 100% wired for novelty. You're an incredibly innovative thinker. You're always coming up with new angles and sort of new ways of doing things. But even if something makes you successful, the repetition will kill you. So it's very hard for you to stay with something when that's your talent. So going back to what you were talking about, there are all these people who are experts who in essence learn a model for marketing or promoting themselves that actually pushes against what their top talent is when we think about their triple threat. So you get scientists who are told that they need to be celebrities, and it doesn't actually work, right? Because that's not their personality, that's not what they do. So they have to approach things from a very different way to really tap into the strengths that they have.
You know, Michael, when it comes to experts growing their authority, we talk a lot about niche and we talk a lot about market and really refining who it is that you're trying to talk to. And there's a big difference between the aspirational market and the excellence market. Tell me how you define the two of those and how you see the difference between the two.
Sure. So the first thing that's really important to understand is that all markets basically are split right down the middle, and there is an aspirational side of the market and there's an excellent side of the market. Like you're pretty much, doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're gonna find both, right? But the aspirational side of the market is in essence looking for a savior. So if you're in the aspirational side of the market, you're basically looking for somebody to solve your problems and you don't want to necessarily take responsibility for it. So I often think about it from the standpoint of the aspirational buyer thinks in this order. The aspirational buyer thinks in the order of spend, then speed, then status. So they start with how much does this cost? That's always their first question. Their second question is how fast can I get it? How fast can I get the result? And their third question is, will I be like you, or will I get whatever result you have advertised, or, et cetera, for as quickly as possible, right? Whereas the excellence market is never looking for a savior. The excellence portion of the market is never looking for a savior. The excellence portion of the market is looking for a guide, right? They're looking for somebody who has information and ideas and concepts that they don't necessarily have yet, right? That they know exactly where they want to go, they know what they want to do, but they know that there is some missing information there. So they think in the opposite order. They think status, then speed, then spend. So they start from the standpoint of, will this person that I am buying from help me get to that future version of myself that I want? That's always the beginning for them, is does this person kind of fit the gap that I'm seeing between where I am and where I want to be? Their next consideration is they are very, very thoughtful about their time. So they're basically asking the question of, how long will this reasonably take? And they're skeptical. So they're not going to be the person who's like, I'm going to do this in a weekend. They're going to be the person who's like, okay, if you tell me we can accomplish this over the course of X number of months, then they will consider that. Or if you're able to say, I know for a fact we can get these things done in a 90-minute block of time or during a day, they will honestly consider it. And that will lead to the very last point, which is spend, where for the excellence buyer, they basically say, okay, if I can get this result and I can get it in this reasonable amount of time, I am expecting that it's going to cost something significant. I am expecting that this is an investment that I will need to make. So a lot of the time, the challenge that I see, especially with a lot of experts, is that the marketing and the tools that they've been given are in essence selling to that aspirational market, and it's really, really hard to get the business to run off of those aspirational buyers. And really at the heart, what it comes down to is the excellence market is solving success problems, and the aspirational market is solving survival problems. And it's very hard to solve survival problems because people have way too many other things that they're worrying about when it comes to survival. Whereas with success problems, there's not that many other things that the successful person is worried about. They know that this is what they're trying to accomplish. It's hyper specific, and they know that this person can help them achieve that, get to that particular place.
Give me an example of a way you've used your authority to find success in that excellence market and in front of that right crowd at the right time.
Yeah. So I would say for me, it's always been about coming up with what I like to refer to as the target problem, right? So a lot of the time we think about target market and we think, okay, how do I, sell to dog owners in Peoria through the ages of 30 to 40, right? But we don't necessarily think about target problem, where we start to say, okay, like, well, what is something that is a very specific problem that really lands in that sort of success problem world? So one example was that I was in a lot of groups and high-end sort of mastermind experiences where basically people were taught something or given some sort of framework or some sort of model, and then went away and never used what they learned, right? And sort of never gone through the process. So when I was developing, I had a mastermind offering that I had built where I was basically like, the structure of this is going to have time for you to implement the stuff that we're actually talking about, right? Like you're going to do things in the moment, right then and there, and make sure the whole thing happened. And just that element of talking about that target problem, talking about that, your homework, you basically get homework from masterminds. That's what I kept bringing up. You basically get homework in masterminds. And in this mastermind, you get to do your homework in class. That was like a major way of selling that particular mastermind that I had been developing at that time.
Your high school teacher creeping out of you there.
Yep, exactly.
Tell me about the success of that when you launched it.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I had some people who the core focus of it was helping them build out an offer based on their thought leadership. So I would help them kind of develop a framework, and then I'd help them build an offer on the back end of it. And we had people who came in with offers that were a couple of thousand when they first started. And through that process, we had one person develop $100,000 offer. We had one person
Wow.
move easily to like a $10 or $25,000 weekend experience. It was one of those things where it was like the positioning was off. And going back to this idea of the problem wasn't lucrative enough to get their audience to pay the amount that they wanted to pay. So we really worked on that target problem for each of them and helped them figure out like what is that thing that basically is going to be more expensive of a problem and more of a success problem, so people will actually just spend more to solve it.
A lot of people tell me, well, I can't possibly get into that niche because there's already X, Y, and Z. They're very successful in there. But the
Mm-hmm.
way you describe the triple threat is that you can still be successful in the niche because you teach it in a different way. Their
Exactly.
process may be the celebrity process, but your process may be the magician sort of process, and you'll attract different sorts of clients into your into your sphere of influence and into your program. I love
Exactly.
that way of
And
thinking.
yeah, and if you actually think about it in terms of the triple threat methodology itself, and you actually put these in an order, it changes the whole structure of things. So, for example, I'm magician, celebrity, scientist is my order, right? So the combo for me is that I'm very, very good at coming up with ideas and frameworks and models, but I'm also very good at the relational side of things, the connecting side of things. And where I don't have as much strength is in the scientist side, right? Where it's much more sort of granular, but I am a triple threat because you could argue that my ability to develop frameworks and order my thinking is actually very scientific in
Yeah,
in
that's
terms
what
of
I
the
was just
model.
going to say. I
Yeah.
mean, the frameworks you've been providing sound pretty scientific to me.
Exactly. So the thing is, we're as a triple threat, we're using these things, but we're using them in the order that makes the most sense for us. So you'll notice that even the way that I've developed the frameworks with the different acronyms and models, it is very magician-like. And the stories are very, very celebrity. And I haven't really referenced, here's a study of
Yeah.
this, or here's a breakdown of that, because that would actually be much more scientist. But in some interviews, in some conversations, I may bring in a study, and what that does is that takes over the scientist part, right? It takes over that component, so it fills that gap for me, but I'm still leaning into the top talents, right? Like I'm still leaning into the strengths, and I'm pulling from other sources the things that I may not be as strong in.
In Manhattan, that's kind of like the networking buzz capital of the world. There's so many people
Yes.
there and so many events and things, and I'm sure you've probably seen some crazy things. But
Yeah.
when it comes to networking or referability, what's some of the give me an example of something pretty unique you've seen there in the heart of New York.
Sure. So there was a theater company called Exit Pursued by Bear. And for right, the name itself, you're like,
Gotta look into that.
right? It's just like it's a very, very creative, it's a very, very creative name, right? Which sort of follows kind of that magician idea. But then you also add to the fact that in the case of this show, in the case of this theater company, most of the time you can basically go online and find tickets to a show and buy the tickets and just go and see the show. It's a very straightforward process. Well, with this company, you basically had to fill out like a wait list, and they would let you know if there was space available, and they would not let you know if there was space available until the night before the show. They would not tell you where you were going. You would get like maybe like an hour before, you'd get an email from them saying, okay, you're going to this location. And in many cases, you weren't going to a theater, you were going to somebody's loft apartment where you saw the show, and they served you dinner in the middle during the intermission, in like a home style kind of, kind of model. And it attracted some of the biggest players within the theater industry. It was not uncommon to see Broadway producers or other top tier celebrities at this particular show because they were so inventive. And people were like, I want to know more about this. And that's kind of a classic magician move. If you think about it like signature moves, the magician's signature move is a magic box. So if you are naturally oriented around innovation, if you come up with something that people are like, I need to know what's inside of that thing, I need to know what it is that you're doing, you're going to attract a completely different level of crowd because you're leaning into that power and that ability.
That's fantastic. Like that goes back to being memorable and just and getting
Mm-hmm.
people to talk about you because you're doing something in a completely different way, which I
Yep.
love. What's your secret sauce to authority and influence?
I'm going to say when it comes to authority and influence, I mean, I think there's so many ways you could approach that idea of secret sauce, but I think the thing that just always kind of stands out to me more than anything else is understanding that there's more than one currency. Um, so a lot of the time we think of currency in the sense of how much money do I have? And when it comes to authority and influence, there's a lot of uh, thought around I can only have authority, I can only have influence, I can only have power, if you will, if I have money. But there are lots and lots of people who their time is actually a much more valuable currency than their money is. And there are people who their connections and the relationships that they have is actually a much more valuable currency. There are people who the way that they are positioned and how others perceive them is actually a much, much stronger, much, much more powerful currency. There are people who their approach or their ideas, the fact that they can come up with new angles and new ways of doing things, is actually an incredibly valuable currency. And there are people whose mindset and beliefs and ways of thinking and looking at the world, that is a currency. And I think that so often we don't think about how influential we could be if we actually looked at the currencies outside of money that we have and thought about how can we use those to achieve the things that we want to get access to the opportunities and the possibilities that are out there.
Yeah, that's especially true when you're selling to the affluent because the
Mm-hmm.
affluent tend to value their time so much more than their money because they have an abundance of money and not an abundance of time because everybody
Exactly.
wants some of their time. And so if you can trade in time currency rather than money currency and show them how you help them get more time currency, that's even a more powerful way to go about it. I love that concept. That's
Thank you.
fantastic. I read somewhere where you did a networking event in New York City that had some sort of scavenger hunt
Yeah.
element to it. Like, tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that.
Yeah. So it was called Relationship Adventure Day, or RAD for short. And basically, what happened was people filled out this four-part survey that told me a ton about them. And I used those surveys and I put them in teams and I had them basically go all over the city doing a scavenger hunt during the day. But I crafted individualized experiences for the participants. So let's say somebody had written that they were looking for a marketing job and they also loved salsa dancing. Somewhere on that journey, they could end up in a salsa studio with two or three people who could potentially get them that marketing job. It was that kind of come up with, it was very magician, right? Like it was very like, okay, here are these weird connections. How do we make these weird connections happen for people and give them opportunities to do things that they would have never thought they'd be able to do, or meet people that they never thought they'd be able to meet?
So, were they on teams with people they didn't know?
Yep.
Yeah, so they were meeting them that way. And then every team had a different list that was
Yep.
tailored to that team.
Yep.
And then did it culminate in an event that night? Did everybody come back and kind of share their experiences?
Yeah, so we played throughout the day. We played the game Bigger or Better. Are you familiar with that game?
I am not.
So it was started by Mormons, and what they would do is they would go to somebody's house with a matchstick, and they'd knock on the door, and they'd say to whoever opened the door, "Will you give me something bigger or better than this?" And if somebody gave them something bigger than the matchstick, then they would go to the next house and they would basically keep trading up until there were things of very, very significant value that sort of came out of the experience. So what we did was we had everybody play bigger or better. So we gave every team, everybody on the team had a matchstick, and they were playing bigger or better throughout the day. So we did a big dinner at the end of the experience at a friend's brewery, I think, and everybody from the teams showed what they had gotten during the day from bigger or better. So we had people come back with street signs, bikes, like toys, like you name it, and that was pretty wild and a lot of fun.
That was great. How many people attended?
I think the one that we did bigger or better at, because we did, I think, two, and then we did one virtually. And I think that was the second one that we did, the bigger or better. And I think we had close to like 100 people involved
Wow,
in that one. Yeah.
that's fantastic. You've
Yeah.
had quite the journey where you've been a high school teacher, you've been on Broadway, rubbing elbows with some big producers. You've produced some of your own shows. If you were to do it all over again, knowing what you know,
Mm.
when it comes to referability and relationships and borrowed trust and authority and influence, what would you do differently if you did it all over again?
Um, I would carve out more time to reverse engineer processes. I think I didn't come to the point of being like, okay, here's a framework or here's a model or here's a way of thinking until much, much later in my career when I had to teach, when I had to sort of go through that process. And I think if at the time, when I was, let's say, when I was working in Broadway, or even when I was working on the events, if I had actually spent the time, and this is interesting because it ties to that scientist thing. It's a scientist move to sit down and sort of break it down and sort of, look at that process in a much more kind of granular way. I think if I had done that, there were probably a lot of things that I would have noticed, and there were probably a lot of opportunities that I could have made even stronger and even better if I had been really looking at, well, what was that process, and could I repeat it, right? Like could I develop a framework or a model around the thinking of these of these things. I think that's what I would, if I had to go back and talk to, talk to young Michael, that I think that's the thing I'd be like, hey, like get out your pen, you know, get out your notebook after every single thing you do and chronicle how you're thinking, man.
The
Yeah,
more we talk, Michael, the more your scientist creeps out of you.
I
the
know,
more
right? It's just
it's in there. It's in there. It's in there. So, I love in one of Seth Godin's books, he says, uh, if you want people to talk about you, do something remarkable, do something worth remarking about, right?
yeah,
And so we've talked a lot about getting people to talk about us, getting people to refer us. Oh, you need to meet Michael. How do we
yeah,
know if we're ready to be referred? How do we know if we're doing the right things to get us referred? How do we even know
yeah.
we're ready to be referred?
Yeah, so I think it actually comes down to something that I remember actually a producer talking about, and he talked about when he would go into a theater and he was deciding whether or not he was going to raise money for a show or invest in a show. He told us that he didn't watch the show, he watched the audience.
Oh, wow.
And one of the keys for him was, did they lean in or did they lean back? Because if they leaned in, they were interested and they were engaged and they wanted to know more. If they leaned back, they were kind of in this mode of like, I've seen that before, that doesn't impress me, that kind of concept. And I think the same thing is applied to referability. If you're talking about something and somebody leans in and asks you more questions or says something like, wow, I never thought about it that way, or oh, that's so interesting, that's so fascinating, then you know that that is something that you want to dig even deeper into, right? And spend time getting to break apart and really understand. Because if people are leaning into whatever that thing is and they're asking you more about it, it is very likely referable, right? Anything that
Okay.
gets people to lean in and ask you those questions, you've got that referability element because you already know that it's hit the accessibility marker, right? Because they're leaning in, right? And if they're repeating it or talking about it, you can pretty much guarantee that they're probably going to want to talk about it to somebody else, right? If they're going back to the remark idea, right? Like they're remarking on it and talking about it, they're probably going to talk to somebody else, about it. The only hurdle you have then is, as they talk about it, listening to that language and being like, okay, are there ways to make this even easier to transfer, right? And that's always your job, is thinking about, okay, if I want people to talk about this, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about your services, it doesn't matter if we're talking about your big idea, your concepts, like whatever it is, if you want people to be able to share it, you've got to make sure that it's packaged in a way that it's easily transferable, that they're able to just share it and not have to worry about it.
Right. If you're having to take too long to explain it to them, they're surely not going to go explain it to anybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah, great concept. You have a great tool on your site that is a referability rater. Tell
Yeah.
me what that does and how that plays a part in this.
Yeah. So basically, it's just a test that you can do that helps you understand how referable you probably are right now. Right. So it'll ask you some questions about your accessibility. It'll ask you some questions about the influence side of things, and it'll ask you some questions about the memory side of things. And you can just see very quickly, like, okay, this is my grade, right? Like this is where I am on this sort of referability side of things. And it'll help you understand what's going to be useful for you, where you might want to spend a little bit more time focusing, and where are your strengths? Where are the things that are really, kind of working for you?
Cool. There's a link to that at myreferabilityrater.com. You can always find that link in the show notes as well, myreferabilityrater.com. So, Michael, you've been working on so many great things. Your life has taken so many paths. What's next for you?
Yeah, so I have been working on a new kind of mastermind model that has been really focused on tying in a lot of my theater experience, and it's called the Black Box. And basically, the idea is bringing subject matter experts together to explore this aspect of the triple threat, helping them understand what their order is for their triple threat, helping them understand the currencies that they have at their disposal, and collaborating with each other. So I'm in the process right now of putting together another black box group, and I'm just really excited about it. It's a lot of fun, and it's a very cool thing to do.
Black Box Mastermind is very magician-like.
Yes, exactly.
That's pretty cool. Well, best of luck with that. Thanks for taking time. Thanks for coming by to joining us. I love how you're sharing your frameworks and your expertise with us. And just thanks for sharing a little bit of your authority and influence.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. It was an absolute blast.
Oh, I love talking with Michael. He is so fascinating, going from high school teacher to Broadway producer, and now helping others create brands that get referred. So do you have that referability factor? You can get his referability rater to see how referable you are and how likely it is that people will actually talk about you when you're not in a room, and in a good way. You can find that at myreferabilityrater.com. That's myreferabilityrater.com. You can also find that over in the show notes. It's right there for you, so you can get your hands on that. Get people to start talking about you. Get people to start referring you to others, because when you leverage that borrowed trust, that's when your authority begins to really take shape. Is your podcast doing it for you? Is your podcast creating that steady stream of potential clients coming in your door? You've published all your episodes. You know the content is good. You've been publishing consistently. But if you're not that authority in your niche, if the podcast isn't creating you the level of opportunity that you expected, if people aren't engaging with you as much as you'd like, let me help. Turn your podcast into an authority engine and not just more content. Move from being the best kept secret to being that recognized, sought after authority. Let me audit your podcast and find your gaps. Head over to podcasttalentcoach.com/coaching, and you can click the button right there, apply to have a chat with me. I'll listen to an episode of yours. I'll audit your podcast and find your authority gaps in there. And then you and I will have a call to review those notes and find out what it's all about. Nope, it's not free. I'm going to give you my best coaching and my best advice to help you move forward. We're going to uncover your authority positioning problem. Where are your gaps? We're going to identify those gaps. Then we're going to develop a plan to help you succeed. And if I feel like I can help and support you to achieve those podcast goals, I'll show you what that looks like as well. Get your podcast audit over at podcasttalentcoach.com/coaching. Thanks for being here this week. I can't wait until we do it again. On the next episode, we're going to talk with Louis Swart. Louis will show you how to strategically position your offers to make them undeniable. Make them the undeniable first choice for your clients. Separate you from everybody else and become that category of one. Not only setting you apart from the competition, but also from the temptation to not take action at all, or to create some makeshift solution. It's a fascinating conversation with my guest, Louis Swart. We're going to do that on the next episode. Until then, step into your authority, and we'll see you next time.